everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Economist Intelligence Unit's Global Outlook video. My name is Agathe Demarais, and I'm joined today by Cailin Birch, the EIU's global economist and lead US analyst, and Imogen Page-Jarrett, a research analyst in our China team based in China. Today, we're going to discuss the rollout of vaccines in the US and in Asia. Until a few months ago, we used to say at the EIU that the course of the pandemic was the main variable to make economic and political forecasts. It's not the case anymore. No, it's all about the rollout of vaccines around the world. So perhaps to start, I'm going to turn to you, Imogen, and perhaps we can discuss the situation in Asia. So as a first intro question, how are things going in Asia for the rollout of vaccines?
Yes, so in Asia, we're expecting most countries to start vaccinating priority groups by the end of March, with some economies like China and Singapore having started as early as December last year. And this year, the first economies we expect to achieve widespread vaccination, or at least 60% of their population, will be Hong Kong and Singapore. And this will be helped by the fact they have relatively large number of healthcare workers compared to their overall population size to administer the vaccines. And they will be followed in the first half of 2020 by other developed economies such as Taiwan, Macau, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and also South Korea. Some of those could be earlier, but we're expecting some regulatory delays, vaccine hesitancy, and also issues with healthcare resources. For China and India, which are the two key economies in Asia, we're expecting them to achieve widespread vaccination in the second half of 2022. They have relatively large populations to vaccinate, but they will be helped by the fact they have manufacturing facilities within their countries to produce COVID vaccines. For many developing countries in Asia, we're not expecting them to pass the 60% immunization mark in the next 5 years. Even though that they will have some support from the WHO-led initiative COVAX, and this is because they do have very limited healthcare personnel compared to their population sizes.
Okay, so mixed picture overall, it seems. Do you think that some countries are going to be able to lift COVID-19 related restrictions this year?
So we're not expecting immunization levels to reach a scale significant enough to lift mobility restrictions until at least 2022. And even after widespread vaccination is achieved, we're expecting that governments will keep in place some sort of restrictions on international travel, like quarantine upon arrival or mandatory COVID tests. And this is because no vaccine is completely effective, and there will be varying timelines across different countries. And this means that tourism activity in Asia is not going to return to pre-pandemic levels until at least 2023.
So these are still bleak forecasts. Do you think it could happen faster, perhaps? Are there any upside risks to your forecasts?
Yeah, I think there are some upside risks. For example, if countries can bring in additional personnel, like medical school workers or military workers to help administer the vaccines, or if other countries or international organizations, bring in personnel to help them, it could bring forward their timelines. But I think downside risks are also prevalent because we don't currently know how often people need to take the vaccines. Or whether the ones we currently have will protect against these mutant strains of COVID that we're seeing at the moment. Also on the supply side, I think production could fail to keep up with demand, especially as some developed economies like in the EU and US have secured an outside proportion of the vaccine supplies. And then, countries might also suffer from constraints on their fiscal resources, meaning they can't purchase enough vaccines for their populations, even though COVAX has said it will help cover the cost for at least 20% of developing countries.
So much, Imogen. So a bleak picture overall, I would say, which is the same pretty much everywhere around the world, perhaps maybe except in the US. I'm going to turn to you, Cailin, now to discuss the situation in the US. So as an intro question, how are things going for the vaccination program in the US?
Well, interestingly, we saw some news on that just last night with the new President Joe Biden's first primetime television address to the country, where he announced that actually as of May 1st, the federal government will recommend that vaccines are made available to any eligible American over the age of 18 years. That's a really big significant step. And it's meant to pave the way for a full opening of the country, it would seem, from Biden's comments, by July 4th, the national independence holiday, of course, a very symbolic step. So we've seen some big and a really very ambitious kind of figures released. We're not quite there yet, of course. As of kind of yesterday's data from the CDC, 19% of the US population has received at least one dose of the vaccine, and about 10% have received the second dose, of course, knowing that we're just really focusing now on the first two vaccines on the market, Pfizer and Moderna, which are 2-dose regimens. And we have to remember now, too, that Biden is 50 days into his term. He'd already put a big goal on his first 100 days in office to want to have 100 million Americans vaccinated by that point. And effectively, we do think that's going to be achieved, and potentially even ahead of time. We really just need to see another 10% of the population, about 30 million Americans, vaccinated in order to reach that goal. And vaccination administration is running at about close to 2 million a day. So that is achievable over the course of the next 20 days, absolutely. Now, this is very interesting. It does put the US behind just a handful of countries in terms of the speed of the delivery of the vaccines. Israel leads the pack, of course. The UAE, the UK, and most recently Chile are the only ones ahead of the US in terms of the percentage administered per 100 million of their population. But it's worth noting that the US is by far the most populous country to have reached that level of vaccination so far.
That's a fairly decent progress. I think that many countries would very much like to be in this position. What do you think lies behind this success?
I think, to be frank, at the moment, it's really due to vaccine supplies. The US government, along with some others, including the UK, were among the first to sign these early purchase agreements. This happened, of course, under the Trump administration last year, and that was done even before the vaccine's effectiveness was proved in trialing. That was a costly gamble, but one that has paid off, again, for the US and a few others, given the success rates that the first two vaccines to hit the US market have had in testing. Now, of course, the promise of increased funding for vaccine rollout efforts under the Biden administration, we did see that $1.9 billion economic relief plan pass through Congress this week. That will include funding to roll out vaccine efforts in a faster and broader way. That probably prompted Biden's comments last night, but of course, we haven't seen the impact of that yet in the numbers, given that it just passed a couple of days ago.
So perhaps to finish with you, Cailin, the multi-million-dollar question: when do you think that the US will achieve widespread immunization coverage? So say 60 to 70% of the population, enough to reach herd immunity.
Yeah, it is the multi-million-dollar question, because that will probably release a lot of this pent-up consumer demand that we've seen in the US. Now, if things continue to pace, we'd expect probably that goal to be achieved by around June. We expect to see new vaccine deliveries coming into the country soon. And of course, the US has already purchased enough through these early purchase agreements, enough doses to cover that 60 to 70% mark of the population by the middle of the year. Now, of course, there's a good chance it won't continue apace. The headline vaccination rate will probably appear to slow in the coming weeks as more and more Americans obtain their second dose. So kind of in terms of the overall vaccination coverage, it might seem like we're slowing down, but ideally that would mean that we're seeing second doses being administered. And then, of course, there are new challenges that could also arise. A lot of the easy wins have been made with the first most high priority groups. And the next wave of doses will be available to younger people. Indeed, per Biden's comments, much younger people very soon, who may not have that same urgency, but also regular contact with their health authorities to be able to get those vaccines administered as quickly as possible. So we may see a mild slowing down. The final challenge, of course, will be to vaccinate people who are in more sparsely populated regions of the United States. which is a good kind of whack of the middle of the country. So there's still a long way to go. We do expect to see that widespread access threshold achieved by the third quarter. But of course, by that point, we also expect the economic recovery to have started to take off.
Thanks so much, Cailin, and thanks so much, Imogen. We're at the end of our video now. Thanks so much for watching us today. You can always find our latest analysis on our website, www.eiu.com, and you can keep an eye on our latest analysis about the global rollout of coronavirus vaccines, or relations between China and Africa, or the impact of the pandemic on migrant remittances. You can also follow us on Twitter at the EIU, or our personal handles, which show nicely on your screen. Thanks for watching us. Stay safe. Goodbye.